crowd. This is outstanding. Look at this crowd. I am so happy to be with a whole lot of Kane County Democrats and a whole lot of McHenry County Democrats. We've got Democrats all over the collar counties. And you guys know that the general perception is that he has no money, he's got no organization, and nobody can pronounce his name. It's going to be kind of hard for him to pull this off. And yet, we had two things going for us. The first was a track record of service in the Illinois Senate. I'd provided health insurance to kids who didn't have it. I had helped to reform a death penalty system that was broken. We had created a tax system that was more just and more fair to working families. I'd worked with Iris Martinez to make sure that we have more funding in our public schools. But the second thing that we had going for us was an incredible faith in the American people. You know, a belief in their core decency, a belief that despite the surface differences of race and religion and ethnicity, that there were a set of values that bound us together as a people. So that it didn't matter whether you were in the inner city of Chicago or out in Kane or McHenry or in some rural area in downstate Illinois, everywhere you went, people would talk about similar values. They'd say, we know government can't solve all our problems. We understand that we've got to teach our children hard work and self-respect and family and faith and community. We recognize those things. But what we also know is that government can make a difference in helping people find jobs that pay a living wage. Government can make a difference to assure that people don't go bankrupt when they get sick. Government can help to ensure that every child in America gets a decent education. We're not just giving lip service to it, but that they get a real education and that they can go to college. And that they can go to college even if they're not wealthy. That government can help to assure that senior citizens can retire with some dignity and respect. People innately understand that we don't just inherit the world from our parents, but we also borrow it from our children. So we have an obligation to give back to them clean air and clean water and a constitution that's not poked full of holes by John Ashcroft. And we have a moral obligation to assure that when we send our troops overseas, that we're sending them for the right reasons. And that we've got a plan. And that they're going to be secured as best as they can be secured. And we're going to bring them home as soon as we can bring them home. Everybody shares those values. Now, you've told me about the challenges of working for 20 years in a plant and suddenly being laid off because the plant moves down to Mexico. And losing your health care and your pensions being threatened and having to figure out how you're going to support your family on $7 an hour working at a local fast food joint. You're the ones who've told me that you've been on the verge of bankruptcy because a family member got sick and you had no health insurance. Or you had an aging parent who couldn't afford prescription drugs and you were doing the best you could to help him or her. You've told me about the fact that you've tried to save for your kids' college education, but it hasn't been easy. And some of you just haven't been in a position to get money from your parents, and so you've had to work full-time while trying to go to school, and after a year or two, you may have to drop out, and you put off going back to school for a year, 2 years, 3 years, until finally the dream fades away. You know, and all across the state, I've met family members who pray every night and wake up every morning anxious because they've got a loved one in Iraq, waiting to see when that loved one might come home, waiting to hear back from them. And the collective stories that all of you have told me is an America that has an incredible strength and incredible resilience and people who have incredible pride, but also folks who are struggling. And we come together because we recognize that we are at a crossroads right now internationally and domestically, and that unless we reverse course, we may be in a position to pass on a world to our children that's a little meaner and a little poorer than the one that we inherited. And that's unacceptable. That's un-American. And we will not let it happen. You know, I was down in Birmingham, Alabama, about a month ago, speaking at the Civil Rights Museum that's down there. It's a beautiful museum, chronicles the Civil Rights Movement, and it's across the street from the 16th Street Baptist Church. And some of you know the history of the 16th Street Baptist Church, because that's where 4 little girls lost their lives in Sunday school one morning when the Klan set off a bomb in the early 60s. And when you go into the church, in the back of the sanctuary, there's a clock that's frozen at 10:22 a.m., the moment when the explosion occurred. And there are portraits of the 4 little girls. And I went into the church with the pastor and some deacons, and they talked about rebuilding the church and the stained glass windows, and then we held hands and we said a prayer, and then I sat on a pew, and I felt physically ill, thinking about what it would have been like to lose one of those 4 little girls, because I've got a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter, and the pain was unimaginable. I couldn't even comprehend what it would have felt like. And that then got me to remember all the women who decided to walk instead of ride a bus because they were marching for freedom. And all the people of every race and every creed who got on a bus one summer and decided to take that bus down to Mississippi and Alabama to register voters, some of them not coming back. And it made me think about all the immigrants who came to this country from distant shores, and not knowing exactly what to expect, knowing they'd have hardship in America, but understanding that it was better to be free in America than oppressed somewhere else, from Eastern Europe and Cambodia and former Soviet Union. All of them, generation after generation, building brick by brick, calloused hand by calloused hand, a better future for their kids. And it reminded me that the sacrifices that are asked of us are so small compared to the sacrifices that our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents have had to make, that we stand on the shoulders of 4 little girls that transformed this nation, that we stand on the shoulder of our immigrant parents, that we stand on the shoulder of those who worked to allow us the freedoms that we enjoy. And we have no excuse not to vote for 50. We have no excuse not to participate. It doesn't take that much. And so let me just close by telling you a story about a woman who came to an event we did yesterday. Her name is Marguerite Lewis. And she came to one of our events, and she told me how excited she was about my campaign and how she had already cast her absentee ballot and how proud she was to participate, which in and of itself is not that remarkable, except for the fact that she was born in 1899. And she's 104 and is going to be 105 next month. And you imagine this woman, Mrs. Lewis, born in the shadow of slavery, born at a time when there were no automobiles on the road and the interway highway system hadn't been built, born at a time when there were no airplanes in the sky and there were no computers anywhere. And she watched World War I happen, and she watched World War II happen, and she watched the development of our great industries, and she watched as women got suffrage, and she watched as the civil rights movement shook off the chains of Jim Crow, and she watched us make progress time and time again, and she's still here, and she's still voting. And if Ms. Lewis at 104, 105 next month, can do a little bit of work in this election to make sure that we restore the kind of democracy that we want in America, then I know everybody here can do the same thing. Thank you guys, I love you. Thank you.